welcome back to Storytime with Dave Booker. Today we're we're getting down to the end of Rogues Gallery. So let's get into it. We'll do today, and then we have one on Friday and two next week, and that's it. And then we'll go on. And I am in the process of running Sheriff in the Small Town 4. And what we'll do is, as I'm writing, I'm almost near the end. I've got about maybe 4 more chapters left to do. So what we'll do is once we're done with this, start going on that. That'll give me enough time to finish it, edit it, and then it'll be published by the time we're done with it. So this one's change of operations. What do you mean there are to be no more retributions? Dr. Nocturn arrived soon after Soleman and Podolsky left and was not pleased with what he was hearing. Madame Nocturn spoke calmly, her gloved hands clasped together. As I say, I've been informed by a credible source that the men had been brainwashed into committing these acts. The women within these walls were also subjected to the same. We cannot hold accountable people who had not consciously committed these acts. Therefore, there will be no more retribution. Dr. Nocturn was not just disappointed, he was frustrated. He had been receiving a goodly sum of money from these attacks. Tony Twocombs would also regret that the theft would end. He and his men had benefited a great deal and also considered themselves crusaders, not criminals. Whether they did these things consciously or not is not the issue. They are still to blame for the condition these women are in and should continue to be treated as the villains they are. Madame Nocturne read into his heart and sighed. He had benefited too much to want to stop. Doctor, I apologize, but really we must cease the persecution. She extended her hand and he took it, but grudgingly. Walking to the mission, he was not looking forward to telling Tony that their association was ended. As he walked in, he considered other forms of crime that would benefit from the use of bats and a well-trained team of men. The bats worked well as a diversion, clearing the ground for swift snatch and grab. Perhaps the association didn't need to end, just changed. And this time there would be no restrictions. He rubbed his hands together and chuckled. No, this wasn't the end, but just the beginning. Seated in Frank's office in the mission, Dr. Nocturne discussed the change of plans. Frank was cautious about making a commitment without talking to Tony first, but since the good doctor had other schemes in mind, he felt confident that they could continue. When will you have a prospect for us? Nocturne shrugged. I'll see what I can find, but surely Tony will have foreseen this possibility and have taskings in reserve. I just wanted to inform you that our original task was finished and that we should work on new possibilities. He departed low in spirits. The task they had been doing had brought an increase in his ability for research. With greater funds, he had begun a new phase in analysis and use of guano. His last 2 papers had been very well received, and he had several more experiments to conduct. For that, he needed more money, a great deal more money. Frustrated and depressed, he needed to relax, and nothing relaxed him more than a shave and a haircut. Thomas was busy, so he sat in a chair to wait. He picked up a copy of the Barber and Cutter Weekly. Inside was an article that Frank had heard about while he was here a while ago. The 2,500-year-old gold Scythian comb was battle scene was having its final viewing and would leave for its next museum tour in 3 days. While the value was high, it would be difficult to find a purchaser. That was where someone like Tony would be handy. The problem was that with Tony and his crew, he'd have to take a modest cut for himself. Tony gave equally, and that meant the more people involved, the less it'd take. All things considered, he decided to branch out on his own. In the cave he called home, he worked out his next move. Tony had an impressive array of weapons. With his ingenuity, he felt he ought to be able to do as well. Unfortunately, all he had to work with was guano. After consideration of the components in this potent product, he felt he could make a smokescreen from it. That might be useful. The first attempt smoked him out of his home for an hour while the acrid stench cleared. He worked out a small canister that could be used for diversion, concealment, and theft. It would take practice and a memorization of where everything was, where he planned to steal, but his memory was still sharp and his agility excellent. He worked out the possibility of a flamethrower of some sort. The more virulent Rano was combustible. He often made it into small bricks and used it to start the fire in his fireplace. While a flamethrower was plausible, it would be highly dangerous and he had no desire to kill. Perhaps he could continue using his winged friends as his gang. He decided on an experiment. Could the bats function as even in the smoke screen? He placed several objects for the bats to bring to him, scattered around the cave. He took several outside and tossed in the canister. The smoke billowed towards the door. His own visibility of the interior was nil. He opened the cage and sent the bats out with the various piped tunes. The bats retrieved everything. The objects he could steal might have to be small, but sometimes the smallest object can carry the highest value, as Tony had once informed him. He'd have to follow Tony around and find out who he used as a fence. After that, he could go after jewelry and other trinkets that could be turned into cash easily. He could do all that was needed and keep all the proceeds. At the mission, Tony was informed that the taskings were no more. He shrugged and accepted the loss of regular occupation philosophically. He'd already prepared for this eventuality and was secure that with his current crew, he could more than make up the difference. Perry and Oedipus entered the mission and were informed of the change in direction as well. Disgruntled that money was so easily come by was now gone, they thanked them all for their opportunity, but they would seek employment elsewhere. Tony was actually thankful that these two were no longer a part of his forces. He had never felt sure they were really the criminal types. Besides, he had planned on divvying out the money from the most recent sales of items. Now there was more for those who remained. Soleman and Flats were in the shoebox working out their own plans. With the retribution over, they could focus on rebuilding the ones who had been harmed and bringing husband and wives back together. That was always supposed to have wanted to return. The other problem was seeking out current members and deprogramming them. There were a total of 15 couples at the last dance. Assuming this was a total complement, it might require assistance to track them all. An amusing thought occurred to Soulman. Use Tony Two Combs and his crew as trackers. He could supply the cabs and they supply the addresses. Then Perry and Oedipus, with the assistance of Persephone and Sharon, could work their way through the list. With all members deprogrammed before the next meeting, there could be a reckoning. Perry went to the Victorian. If he could somehow convince or trick Victor into letting him see the club membership listing, he could get started immediately. As was his wont, he decided to bring Oedipus with him. It would give them a chance just to be together and enjoy company. It would also allow Perry to see how far along he had come on the program. Pulling into the club, they knocked and were led into the library. Several other members were present, and Perry decided it was a good time to exchange cards. This would give him a leg up on locating the members. Walking, talking, and making contacts, the two found their way from member to member. Victor was hidden behind a screen, taking it all in. At first, it seemed a normal occurrence. New members often sought out ways to contact established ones. This gave them access to members who could assist with investments or members who needed investment opportunities. Oedipus spoke with members, talked about recent gains, and in general behaved as Victor expected. Perry did the same, but almost seconds after Oedipus. He had originally considered Perry to lead, yet here it was Oedipus acting almost as if he were the older brother. Made Victor curious. Emerging from the screen, he approached Perry and invited him into the office. Away from Oedipus, he could see how far the programming had actually worked. Sitting behind the desk, he offered Perry the chair that Marjorie had used. He wanted a full view of what Perry did. Perry edged the chair slightly closer to the desk. His face was a mask of attention, but his mind was roving the entire office, searching hidden safes, logs, and any other information that would be useful. Beneath the desk, Victor's boots began to tighten in a warning, as did Soulman's shoes. Both men silently acknowledged that danger was imminent. Victor made small talk laced with tactical words and references that would spark a reaction from someone who was fully integrated. Perry showed none of the reactions that were expected. Now he was sure Perry was not one of them. His membership to the club was voided and he was shown to the door. Perry left without a fight. To do so would mean problem for Oedipus. Oedipus was led into the office and put under the same investigation. Victor smiled as he received the responses he wanted. Anger at the mention of certain words, calmness and eagerness at others. Oedipus was fully integrated and would advance as expected. I'm afraid we had to renounce your brother's membership to our facility. He didn't have the Victorian spirit and would have been an irritant after a while. I hope you understand we'll remain a member. Oedipus looked dejected that Perry was no longer a member, but accepted it with a shrug. I don't see how this affects myself remaining a member. I'm glad you don't hold this against me. Victor rose and extended his hand. Not at all. We're closing for the day until this evening, so I'll have my man show you out. Exiting the club, Oedipus looked around and, not seeing Perry or the vehicle, caught a cab back home. Victor called Marjorie in and discussed what he had done. She was upset that he had canceled Perry's membership. That was foolish and unnecessary. By allowing him to remain, we could have monitored him and his actions. Now he may act against us, and we won't know about it until it's too late. Get him on the phone and offer to renew his membership. Invite him to the next dance. I'll check the women he brings again. Don't feel secure about the tall one. We need to find out what their game is in order to stop it. An hour later, Victor made the call. Perry accepted the apology and reinstatement. In the shoebox, Soleman worked out his options. The reinstatement had been a surprise, but not entirely unexpected. They'd want to monitor his actions, but what actions would best work in his favor and still relieve their minds of him as an enemy? He instinctively understood that having tested him, they would check Persephone. He brought out his pocket recorder and fast-forwarded to their conversation. It had been a casual one and rather rambling. Listening to it again, he put on the headphones to hear each word clearly. Another rewind and play, and he tried once more. There was something he heard that carried the key. Yes, there it was. Certain words were stressed. These had to be the key words that would activate a specific response. He wrote them down, then constructed a conversation with Oedipus using those words. You can note the response, create another for Persephone to use with Sharon and see if the responses matched. If so, then Persephone could be reprogrammed for a proper response and pass the test. She, at least, would be secure. He rushed home and found Oedipus in the living room, relaxing after having gone over stocks and bonds since returning. Perry began his conversation and noticed reactions to key words. He went to the desk and composed a new conversation for Persephone. As he wrote, he talked about his own conversation with Victor, its aftermath, and his reinstatement. Oedipus was overjoyed that Perry was still a member and poured out 2 drinks to toast the event. Perry quickly laid his arm over the page as he toasted that he'd be going to the dance that evening. Rising, he had placed his hand over the page and prevented Oedipus from viewing it. As soon as he could, he went to find Persephone. She was with Sharon in the garden. Persephone, I'd like a word with you. His tone and manner were in keeping with the Victorian model as proposed by Victor. Persephone hurried to his side, flexed himself so that he could remain, and Persephone hidden, he had her read the conversation. You'll need to note reactions to the highlighted words. If they are the same as the ones I noted, I'll hypnotize you to react in a similar manner. She read the paper again, noted what to look for, and realized there was too much information to accomplish. Perry, you'll have to sit and watch. You saw it first with Oedipus, and you will see it again with Sharon if it happens. Perry agreed and returned with her to the seats. Persephone began with small talk and then gradually introduced the script Perry had given her. The words caused a reaction, but ones that were different to the ones Oedipus had. Perry had placed a pad at his side and was taking notes without ever looking at the pad. When done, he would program Persephone with the same actions. They were just finishing when the maid approached and reminded them that it was time for the ladies to eat and then get ready for the ball. Very stretched and remarked it was a good idea for all of them. Over a light supper, they talked about the dance and which they wanted to reserve for each other. Sharon was so excited that she could hardly eat. For her, the dances were the highlight of the week. Oedipus's enthusiasm had waned slightly. For him, the dancing was a waste of time, and he preferred to meet with the other men in the library, discussing finance. Harry noted the progression and understood why the women would eventually rebel against going to the ball. With Oedipus, he had hoped things would move slower since he and Sharon were closer. Seemed it was not to be. He was losing interest in her, his loving heart and soul, and seeing her as an ornament to be worn on his arm. Persephone saw it as well, since Sharon and she spent a lot of time together, and it was heartbreaking. It usually took the ladies longer to ready themselves than the men, but this time Persephone was ready and waiting on Perry. He took her into a small office that was hardly ever used. Here he performed a short hypnosis session. He found her difficult to put under, as she was strong-willed, but once she remembered that she could trust Perry, she allowed herself to submit. With Persephone properly conditioned, they attended the dance. The program followed the standard set, and Perry knew that his every move was being watched. In one of the intervals, he saw Persephone invited into the office by Marjorie, who had been exceptionally friendly to her all evening. Within a short time, Persephone returned and kissed Perry as she passed. This was another suggestion he had added at the last minute to let him know everything was going as planned, and she had then convinced she was indoctrinated. Throughout the evening into the morning, Perry played his part. He thanked Victor over and over again for allowing him back into the club. He said he had become accustomed to the atmosphere and would have missed the information exchange regarding investments. Victor at first was insured, but seeing Perry so enthusiastic and apologetic, considered that enough of the indoctrination had taken hold and he was not a threat. Even for him, the club was nothing more than a way to increase his wealth. He had given information that was beneficial to the others and was therefore of use. He gave Perry no further thought and concentrated on Oedipus. Here was one who was coming along nicely. He spent more time conversing than dancing. Sharon was becoming saddened at his lack of attention. It wouldn't be long now before she rebelled and Oedipus would disfigure that sweet, innocent face. Then he would be ripe for crime. He had a special job for Oedipus, one dangerous and risky, but he had a gut feeling that Oedipus would succeed where others had failed. In the vault of the Foothills Bank was a collection of valuable Victorian jewelry that had been recovered from a shipwreck. It was awaiting pickup for inclusion in the museum, but was kept secure until the display cabinets were ready and wired for security. Oedipus' investments were in keeping with a man who was interested in security. Such a man would know the workings of all manner of security procedures and equipment. Victor rubbed his hands in expectation. In his mind, the jewels and baubles were already in his safe. After the dance, Perry and the company departed. In the limo driving home, Perry noted that Sharon was more subdued than normally. Oedipus was going through more business cards he had collected and annotating what business ventures he wanted to join. Persephone was holding on to Perry's hand. She wanted him to deprogram Oedipus for Sharon's sake, to give her back the man she loved. Perry was hesitant. He still had no idea how to bring the Victorian down, and till then he needed Oedipus as he was. With the next thought, he reconsidered. No, he did not. It was too big a risk, and people he cared about. Once home, he took Oedipus to the library and strapped him into a chair. It grieved him to do it, but he had to have his partner back. Putting the headphones on him, he began the deprogramming session. Oedipus was made to see how far he'd gone down the rabbit hole, how his actions had harmed one he loved, how those actions would have resulted in far greater damage soon. Oedipus felt the remorse and pain of hurting Sharon, something in his right mind he would never imagine himself doing. He remembered the hurt in her eyes as he began to neglect her. His constant angry words when she distracted him as he sought wealth. Perry watched a gradual change back to the Oedipus he had known since the beginning. The former policeman who had fought by his side many times and on whom he relied. The man of compassion whose heart was filled with love for Sharon and who would walk through any danger to ensure her safety. Hours later, Oedipus was back to himself, his body lathered in sweat, his arms sore and bruised, fighting against the restraints. Fortunately, it was Saturday morning and the servants were gone for the weekend. Oedipus had the time he needed to rebuild himself and prepare for the next stage in the fight for what was right. While he had been deprogramming Oedipus, Persephone had done as much for Sharon. For her, the effects had not been quite so dramatic, but was still painful and exhausting. For Perry and Persephone, they saw what was to come when they had to do the same for all the members of the Victorian club. For a while, it would be a nightmare, but when the nightmare was over, the sun would rise on people whole and in control of themselves. Couples could be reunited, and the women who had suffered, who had thought themselves married and now were cast aside, could be. He paused. What could he do for these women? How could he bring happiness into their lives? He called Dr. Frobisher, an acquaintance who specialized in dermatology. Between them, they would find a way to heal the scars and bring health and normalcy back to them as far as possible. Dr. Frobisher had a new approach which he had high hopes for. It required a great deal more money than he had at present, and grants were far and few between for his specialty. Perry chuckled. Money was no problem and asked for the sum required. Within moments, Perry left to bring a check to the good doctor with the admonition that results should happen soon. He gave the address for the Nightengale mission for subjects willing to be tested for a healing process. His next stop was the mission itself. Madam Nightengale, I have spoken to a friend of mine. Dr. Frobisher is a dermatologist who is working on a way to reduce the appearance and pain of scar tissue. He now has sufficient funds to finish what he began, but he requires subjects to test on. He took off his glove, showing a deep scar. Taking off the other, he showed the remnants of a matching one. When I first heard about what happened to these women, I visited my friend. He's come a long way in his researches. I gave him whatever he needed. I was also willing to burn myself with acid to allow him to test his progress. My left hand was healed to the point that the scar is no longer noticeable. Makeup will cover the rust that remains, and it will be almost invisible. I commend your efforts on healing of the soul. The woman I brought back to her husband was strong, stronger than I ever believed someone who has been through what she has could be. If you have done the same for the others, then once they are deprogrammed, they can either return to their husbands, who will also be deprogrammed, or once healed, they can begin their lives over again. Madam Nightengale was staring at the two hands resting on the desktop. If this doctor was capable of healing this slight scarring to this point, it was possible that every person in the place could have their lives returned to them, able to walk the streets unashamed. The fact that Soleman had scarred himself on purpose to ensure the success of Frobisher's research showed just how positive of success he felt, as well as how much he cared about the women under her care. She raised the veil covering her face. She smiled when Soleman didn't flinch at the sight. I'll discuss this with my ladies. 2 times have I unveiled myself to a man since I was first made to look like this. First time was to Dr. Nocturn, who helped us in revenge and retribution. The second was to you, to show me that the blame does not lie on the shoulder of the men, but the blame lays with another. I feel that you are seeking retribution, not on the ones whom he has corrected, but on the one who corrupted others. Soleman promised to end the Victorian club and those who ran it. She placed the veil and let him out of the mission. At the door, she pressed Soleman's hand warmly. You will always be welcome as a friend. It is now late afternoon. Perry had not slept and was getting tired. He had one final stop to make. He went out to see Thomas's barber shop. He went in while Thomas was busy with a customer. Keeping his head low so his face was hidden, he waited for Thomas to finish. Once alone, he rose and closed and locked the door. Thomas did not recognize Soleman. To him, that meant that Tony Twocombs was not a true criminal. He motioned for Thomas to sit. Soleman's voice was firm, but not unfriendly. You are Tony Twocombs, current leader of the Pietro mission. You are not a criminal, though. You have committed crimes. Thomas squirmed in his seat. He felt as if he was being judged, and the feeling was that the judgment would be harsh. Soleman raised a hand. If I sought to bring you to justice, we would not be meeting in this fashion. You would already be standing behind bars. Up to now, your crimes have been one of retribution against men who you were told had been done serious harm to women. I allowed the crimes to continue on the belief that justice was being served. Having been corrected of that assumption, I can no longer allow such actions to continue. He paused and looked at Thomas with penetrating eyes. Speak. I was told recently that we were wrong, and we also have stopped, though I admit I had other crimes in contemplation. Thomas felt admitting in advance might prevent worse punishment. Someone was generous. Contemplation is not action, though it usually leads to it. You have already committed small crimes, which I have discovered. The funds you have gained through your first crime I will ignore. You were taken advantage of, and the small sum you took was to balance the books on the loss of your original shop. The funds you took from the bank are another matter. Again, the pause. Speak. Well, I have my share of the money. I haven't spent it. And while I know who has the other half, I can't ask them for it. I'll replace the whole sum from what I have gained through our recent takings. Someone nodded in acceptance. Place them in an envelope with a notice that these are the stolen funds found and returned. That will be sufficient to expunge your guilt. Someone looked into Thomas's heart. You are clever, but the guilt you wear weighs on you. You are not cut out for crime and will cease. You and those that follow you will perform one final act, but one that will balance the scales. I will pay you to perform certain actions. When I tell you to, you will do one task. This will be a final act of retribution. After this final action, you and they will cease your criminal activities. You will all receive enough that they can begin new lives, and you will be able to afford the barbershop that you desire and your skills warrant. One final thing. I respect your skills and ingenuity. If you agree to these terms, I want to be able to call on you in your persona of Tony Twocombs, should I ever be in need of your unique skills. But in these actions, you would be acting in the call of justice. Thomas gave this careful consideration. He didn't like always looking over his shoulder, waiting for the moment someone came up and said he was going to jail. He'd heard what prison was like from the men in the mission, and he did not find it appealing. Someone had offered him a way out, and he decided to take it. Rising from the chair, he extended his hand. Soleman grasped it, but offered this warning. Be sure you do as you have promised. Should you fail, I'll return, and our meeting will not be as friendly. I know of your weapons and have devised means of rendering them useless. Thomas paled and nodded in understanding. Someone went to the shoebox, changed, and went home to rest. His biggest challenge was yet to come. All right, so that's it right now. The next chapter is the beginning of the end. And then we're getting close. We're almost at the end already. So that's it for today. I appreciate you being here. I look forward to getting these finished. We'll be doing, I think it's 2 chapters next on Friday. So that's it for today. I look forward to seeing you again on Friday. Be good and be good to yourself. Bye-bye.